All right, so all this month again, we've been working on the general theme, a world without hate. And last week, we talked about how our DNA, our humanness, scientifically actually has an ability to have particles line up and match it, that we are that powerful, even if we don't realize it. And I said I would share some ways in which we can actually practice getting into this mode. And a lot of this week, just for full disclosure, is taken from the work of both Pima Chodron and Tim Olmstead. That's a lot of what you'll hear today. So the idea is that our meditation, our prayer, and our actions every day, whatever our personal spiritual practices and how we make decisions based on that through the day, our actions lead us into this, this place where we can actually realize all of that science and all that stuff we've been talking about all month long, about how we can live in a world where there is peace and less stress and less fear and definitely less hate. And part of that is seeing things as they actually are. It's broadening our perspectives, right? And recognizing the perspectives of others. And to do that, we work on ourselves. We don't work on other people. We have to work on ourselves. And with that, we know that that vibration moves out. So our way of helping the world is to help ourselves. We need to do that first. And we need to surrender our disappointment in things and distinguish between things like emotions and feelings. You know, what is it that we're actually feeling? Are we aware of what we're really feeling? Or at the very least, are we recognizing if it's an uncomfortable or a joyous feeling? And sometimes our body reacts really similar to both. So to get to know where we're really at is important. So when we take the time for this, and I gave you this quote last week towards the end, I'm gonna start off with it this week. The mind, our recognition of our thoughts and our feelings are the main thing. And when we align that with that heart-centered, on purpose feeling, we get somewhere. So, and I said this again last week, a peaceful mind sees a peaceful world. A fearful mind sees a threatening world. An agitated mind sees a chaotic world. An impoverished mind will see a desolate world. And a stable mind, now notice that's stable, not overly positive or overly wonderful or overly joyous, but a stable mind has a workable, fluid, flexible world, able to see the grades, able to see the primaries, able to see all of the pastels, recognizing things as neither overtly good or bad, but is. The stable is where we're shooting for, not I need to be super positive or I need to be super joyful. Part of that recognition, and I'm just gonna give you this reference, and it's something that you can look up on your own. It's readily available online, but it's a feelings wheel. And it was developed by Dr. Robert Plutchik, Plutchik. And I said, when we recognize what's going on in us, are we able to really put a name on it? Can we say, this is actually what I'm feeling, so that I can know what it is and allow it to flow? And we know through the science that the feelings, when we are triggered into a feeling, okay, when we are triggered into that space for whatever reason, plus or minus, whatever we're recognizing as, our body's chemical reaction is 90 seconds long. 90, not even as long as a song on the radio, right? 90 seconds for our body, our chemistry to flow with that feeling, that emotion. After the 90 seconds, it's totally our choice whether we feed it or not, and whether we bring it back. And I found this wheel interesting because we always talk about, you know, sad, fearful, surprised, happy, But there's so many versions of happy, right? And there's so many versions of angry. And sometimes I think it's in our discernment process of recognizing those 90 seconds. Well, I'm recognizing it in the angry zone, but is it because I'm frustrated? Or is it because I feel humiliated? And I think that helps us with the choices then on where we go from there. When we allow the awareness of discerning that information. In order to have the awareness, we need to do things like sit and be and do nothing. Find our baseline. So we bring out feelings that we experience, but if we recognize where we are in our baseline, it's easier to discern where we are otherwise. So awareness is more of hearing and seeing and thinking and smelling all at the same time. We like to think, or sometimes we think that awareness and sitting and not doing anything means we have to push everything out of our thoughts. We need to push everything out of our heart. We need to be in absolute nothing. And yet in awareness, we recognize the everything. So when we sit and we breathe and we offer that to ourselves, it's like training to be Sherlock Holmes, right? Where you go into a space and automatically all your senses are engaged and you recognize the world that you're in, especially when you recognize any kind of trigger. Again, whether we're recognizing it as a plus trigger or a negative trigger, what is that we're recognizing in our body, in our internal self? Did our breathing get faster or slower? You know, all of these things. I know some people that when they're triggered certain ways, they recognize a difference in their hearing. They actually hear a buzzing or a tone or something. You know, who would even know that? Sometimes we just attribute those things to, oh, I have, you know, something wrong with me. I need to go to the doctor. And yet to recognize our own body, you know, where are we processing the emotion? What is that experience? Where are we either gaining or losing power? That's a line from Caroline Myss. Where are we gaining or losing power? You know, so I shared yesterday with Carol and Shelley when we had people in here that I got ridiculously nervous and, you know, just like crazy, where I had to go get myself some ginger tea down the road to remind myself to chill out a little bit, that the program would be okay, you know. And then sometimes it's not the why, it's oftentimes the what and the how. You know, what is triggering that? How is it being triggered? Not why. I think sometimes we say the whys and we get ourselves into a victimhood or a blame situation, you know, and yet to concentrate on the what's, we really do bring it back to ourselves. What is it all about? And what do I choose to do with it? What perception are we having and using in the moment? Is it calm, fear, anxiety, curiosity, irritated? This is a line from, it's attributed to Buddha. I can't honestly say if that's where it's from, but it's attributed to Buddha. He talks about, are you a lion or a dog? And in the moment, if a stick or a ball gets thrown, a dog is more apt to just give chase and grab it and go, yay, there's something for me to follow, right? And it doesn't matter what it is or how it got there. It's almost like a cat, you know, chasing the little thing, you know, it's just there. And I'm gonna get it, no matter what. A lion turns and sees where that thing came from before it goes after it. Where and the what? Are we going to pursue it or not? It's that 90 seconds of letting it flow through you. That's the practice. First, to allow yourself the sit time to breathe and know who you really are. And then when something moves you from that stable place, where did it come from? What is it exactly? We put ourselves, another technique, to put ourselves in a chair across from us and actually talk to ourselves. I know sometimes we always tease people that do the third person with themselves, right? And yet, that might be an objective way for us to get to what we actually are feeling, thinking, and where it came from. You know, talking to ourselves compassionately, pretending and knowing that we are our own best guide. We have the soul into intuition to do that. You know, we are not left without guidance. And to talk to ourselves like a trusted friend, a compassionate friend, but also that friend that challenges us to be more. That perfect advisor. You know, awareness is that being open to explore all avenues, to talk to ourselves about what else is out there. It's awareness is recognition, it's curiosity, it's honesty, it's objective, but it's also integrated. Now, are we able to integrate other perceptions in that we are recognizing when we have this talk with ourselves, right? And still remain somewhat objective about the choice instead of being triggered. Again, it's the what and how questions instead of the why questions. It's the checking in often, not just in the morning cushion time or the evening cushion time, but often throughout the day. And we get to know our own personal, I'm going to call them warning signs. I don't know if there's any perfect word for that, but our own warning signs and when we may be veering off and choosing to grasp on to an emotion or a feeling and keep it rolling when maybe we don't need to. And sometimes those things turn into, like, anger isn't in itself a bad thing. It tells us something that's going on with ourselves and the world, right? It's when we feed it and it turns into hate that we get into the danger zone. So again, where are we losing our energy? Where do we recognize those warning signs in us? And moving ourselves from the world is not always the answer. So I know so many people that are like, I just clicked off all the news. I just removed myself from everything. You know, kind of like you cloister yourself into your own little bubble so that you don't have to deal. And yet, I don't know. I think that's healthy for a little while to get to know ourselves. That's not a bad thing. But we can't, we are part of a whole world, right? I'll give you a tiny example. Before the whole COVID thing last February and March, towards the end of 2019, I decided I was turning off everything. I'm like, I've had enough. I've seen too many people be irritated with each other for no reason. I'm feeling bad about all these people. Now I got the stuff in my head. I'm just turning it all off. And I did. And then I went and took a couple-week vacation with my kids in February. So it was like almost 2 to 3 months of not really paying attention to the world. And I was in my happy little space. It was great. Kids and I did vacation, everything happy. Get back into this building and I'm met by one of our members that always, always, always gives me a hug, whether I want one or not. That's the personality, right? Hi, how you doing? And that person stood way far away from me and said hello. That's the first thing I noticed. I didn't know why. That's how in a bubble I was. That's how clueless I was to what was going on in the world. I'm like, I just took it like they had a sniffle and they were being polite. I didn't know. And then we get to the circle, and I remember saying something like, it's okay if you don't want to. And then when I realized later, because I got curious enough to start looking, because he wasn't the only one acting out of character for what I recognized. And I went to some of my trusted sources and I'm like, holy wow, what? And it took me a while to get caught up. I had to go and figure out what was going on. I don't know that that was the most positive thing for me and this community, because it took me that long to get caught up, right? So I've learned since then to find a boundary. My trusted sources, I have those, right? And that's what I lean on to at least understand. I don't know that ignorance is balance. Ignorance is not balance, right? Especially self-imposed ignorance. There's a difference between a child and not experience, and self-imposed ignorance. And that's not balance. It might feel blissful for a little while, but it's not balance. Awareness without drowning in everything. That stability is what we're shooting for. Making choices about what sources we use for information that don't drown us. Pema Chodron says that really miserable people are the most motivated people. And that can go one of two ways. It's either super motivated to keep up the work of healing or super motivated to stay triggered. I can go either way. The challenge is to keep up our practice of centered, steady awareness, where it's in the healing mode, even when we are feeling good, even when we are feeling good. Because I think sometimes that's when we drop off our practice, because everything seems hunky-dory, and then we forget to check in with ourselves. And I did that on purpose. Not such a healthy thing. So this past week, I attended a seminar about the separation of church and state. And they talked about the Johnson Amendment, which talks about and says that tax-exempt organizations may not endorse a candidate or party. And then as I'm listening to all of the discourse, I realized that this is good advice for everyone, not just different organizations. But the idea is that we take the personal out of issues. We take the personal out of situations where we are triggered, and we work on the actual issue itself, and not blaming, calling out, being, I don't like this person, they stink, or this person is really lovely, and put them on a pedestal, right? It's working the issues, but that takes time, and it takes awareness, and we must be willing to do the work. We must be willing to bring into our lives more than one avenue of information. And it's also not about discrimination once we choose what we believe and we know is a moral path, right? It's to hold space for someone else's awareness to flourish and to find. So the analogy is a rushing river, and through that awareness we find, instead of being sucked down the river that we are in the middle of, we find that path of rocks that are protruding up above the surface that we're able to walk down in full awareness of everything, because then you can see down into the river, you can see what's happening, you can see all around you. But it takes a lot of work and perseverance. Present day examples of that for me are some people of color that are writing and researching and putting out some amazing work, like Heather McGee and Austin Channing Brown. We read, some of us as a group, the Austin Channing Brown book a few months back as a book club. But nowhere in either one of those books is a calling out of an individual. It's a recognition of patterns and research and awareness, which is wonderful. It's wonderful. There are several LGBTQ people that I follow, non-binary and trans. Three of them are Avok, Jeffrey, and Mila Jam. Just throw those names out there in case you want to do any. But they are activists that are fully them. They don't pretend not to be them, but they're not calling anybody else out for not being like them. It's this very loving, and again, research-centered approach, because they share the research. So it's a learning approach to embracing awareness, instead of a blaming approach to situations. And we need to know our limits. So, you know what, even a knight wears armor into battle, right? You need to know when it's okay to put your armor on and say, you know what, I need to be this way in this situation. I don't know that that's wrong, but to know that we get to choose in the moment as well. I don't know how many of you saw the original Harry Potter movie. Actually, at the 20th anniversary of it this weekend, I took my kids to the theater for the 20th anniversary. But there's a scene in there where Harry Potter's picking out his wand. And the shopmaster, Ollivander, notices that his wand is made of the same stuff that the very evil Voldemort character's wand is made of. And he says to Harry, I know we can expect great things from you because the evil guy does great things. He said they're terrible things. He's chosen terrible ways to use his power, but they're still great. And what an amazing analogy that is. That we have the power to be great in either way. Do we affirm people and bring them forward by working on ourselves in an affirming way and awareness? Or do we choose the quote terrible way? One more, I find theater a great way to show these examples because it leaves real people names out and we can work on the issues. But there's a show, it ended in 2012 called Merlin. It was a BBC show. It's actually playing on Netflix now. And Morgana and Merlin are both magic people in the story. Merlin, at one point in the story, recognizes out loud his responsibility in throwing out perceptions for Morgana, where Morgana chooses evil over compassion and cooperation. Same thing with Mordred. Merlin says, I understand my part in your perception, but you still chose yuck. You know, I can understand where you're coming from, and I can understand even why you think I'm to blame for part of this because of my part in your life. But it still comes down to what do we choose on an individual basis. And in the story, Merlin chooses to protect those that don't have the full picture. He protects those that don't know everything. And he has a more integrated, fuller knowledge of everything that's going on and who's affecting who and what. And because he protects the people that are choosing fairness, even if they don't understand the full picture. I find that fascinating. The recognition that we can help and protect and have a space for people to get to where they need to be, that we know that they are really, really trying. And yet they're not quite hitting the mark because they don't have the full picture. Maybe we have a broader picture, but we don't shame them for that. Or say, you know what, you have to listen to me now and get the whole picture. Because in the Merlin story, he recognizes some of them aren't ready for the full picture or even for fully what he can do. So in wrap up, we recognize, we sit with it, we feel it, and then we choose. And that's a continual practice of perspective broadening, of awareness, and of practicing letting emotions run through us, recognizing what it feels like, where it's pulling in our body, our mind, and our heart. And then knowing after 90 seconds, we choose. We totally choose whether to fuel it or not, for positive or negative. Thank you.